I'm Jasmin Kerstmont, the person on the right in the picture, and I have with me Lieke on the left. And we've been working together now, I think, for a good 2.5, almost 3 years. So we've built some experience on building a team, and we've learned through a lot of challenges, and especially the last couple of months through COVID, we were actually happy that we had the team in place to work through our project. Let me just go find my mouse. So we'll briefly talk about what the project scope was, and then I'll hand over to Lieke to talk about the project approach, and then she'll hand back to me to talk about the team diversities and problems we faced and how we resolved them with the team that we had. So first of all, you see on the right here, we had a project deadline because there was going to be an FDA submission. And that's pretty much what we knew at the very beginning of the project. And we had, and I'll just let the slide build up a little bit, when we started back in the first quarter of 2018, we had one project manager on our side, and at the bottom here, we had one data manager on the customer side. And that was pretty much all we knew getting into it. But by end of quarter two, Lieke had also come on board, and at the sponsor side, there was also a new statistician and a data manager coming on for the support of legacy data conversion. Unfortunately, I don't know if you saw it, but the data manager that was initially there left about the same time as that we put our team together. So while we were doing a legacy data conversion, there also was no legacy of people at the sponsor side who had been part of any of the trials that were happening. So we kind of knew from project start that probably we were going to be in trouble, or at least it was going to be a very challenging project. As is good practice, we started with one pilot trial, and the intent was that we would run through that pilot trial, run the lessons learned, and then move on. But I guess the sponsor was quite happy with us because even before we finished the pilot trial, they piled on 15 more trials onto our bucket. As you see, the deadlines did not shift, of course, in that period. It actually got a little bit more challenging because by the end of a year, they added on 2 more trials. Luckily, at that point, the data manager who had left a year earlier came back. So we were really happy about that because we had lots of questions for him. And around the same time, another 6 trials were added, and then 2 more trials were added. And before you think this is going to go way off, you see that I'm at the top of my page. So that's the scope that we had. So by the end of quarter 2, we had 21 trials, or no, 24 trials, and we had a deadline end of March a year later. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Lieke to talk about the project goals, challenges, and approaches.
Yes, thank you, Jasmin. Well, as with all client projects and assignments, the main goal is to deliver on time, on budget, and of course with the right quality. Well, the data had to be converted correctly, and we had to be compliant with the CDISC standards, but as it involved the conversion of multiple trials, we also had to make sure that the conversion was done consistently across trials. So for instance, we wanted to make sure that categories that we were assigning, that they were the same across trials. So it was really also important that we did this consistently. Well, as Jasmin mentioned, the scope increased, so we also had to scale up the team. That was also one of the goals actually during the whole project, actually, because the scope was increasing all over. And well, we onboarded junior staff with limited experience. And one other goal was really to keep the team motivated because it was a huge project with a lot of repetitive tasks. And yeah, then it's really important to keep the team motivated that you really want to continue delivering a high quality. And well, the project also knows some challenges. Well, first of all, we had to deal with a new client. And as Jasmin mentioned, the discussion partner left in the beginning, so that was really challenging, but fortunately he came back. Well, we also had to deal with a new team. As I mentioned, well, we onboarded new staff, so we had to make sure that everyone within the team was aware of all the project conventions, all the decisions made, that they were also implemented in the other studies. We also had to deal with some really complex data structures, and especially for the phase 2 trials, we actually just had one big flat data set containing all the variables. And well, as you can see on the screen, some data sets actually contained over 10,000 variables. So really huge data sets with poorly described metadata. So it was sometimes really challenging to figure out what the data actually contains, what it meant. Well, we also had to deal with the data was collected actually by multiple CROs. So we really had to get familiar with, okay, what is there within the data, but luckily data that came from the same CRO had a similar data structure, so we could make use of that. If we had seen it before, then of course we could do the conversion more efficiently. Then, yeah, something about the project approaches that we took. So, well, the project actually consisted of 2 parts, and the first part was that pilot project, so that what actually entailed the conversion of a phase 2 trial to SOTM and ADAM, and we also had to reproduce some tables. That was more or less done as a QC activity to check whether the tables that we created based on the ADAM datasets were in line with the tables that were already part of the CSR that was created by the clients. So that was really done as a QC activity. What was really important that all the decisions made within this pilot project were also, well, had to be implemented in all subsequent trials. So we made a mapping convention document where we actually indicated, like, okay, where we also had more or less a library, like these values are the ones to be used, these are the decisions that were made. So just to make sure that we follow the rules also in the other studies that had to be converted. Well, when we started with this project, the team just consisted of 3 programmers, 1 programmer with more than 15 years experience and 2 programmers with little to no experience. And well, this programmer with more than 15 years experience really supported the programmers with little to no experience. And within this pilot project, we took the approach to check, okay, each team member was responsible for certain domains. So he or she had the responsibility, for instance, for domains adverse events, vital signs, so both in the creation of SOTM datasets for these domains, but also in the creation of Define-XML and also in the SCRG. So it was really domain related and domain oriented. That is the approach that we took within this pilot project. And then, well, the project continues, as Jasmine said. We had to convert 20 phase 1 trials. We only had to convert them to SOTM, but we also had to convert an additional 5 phase 2 trials. And again, we had to convert them to SOTM, ADAM, and we had to reproduce tables for these. And this had to be done within a time frame of 1 year. Well, as the scope was increasing, we expanded the team, and we expanded them with OCS Life Sciences ex-trainees. Within OCS, we have a traineeship, a 2-month traineeship, in which well, starters kick off their career more or less, and they get acquainted with CDISC standards, they obtain a SAS base, and then they are assigned to a project. And well, we had some OCS Life Science extremes within our team, and we really noticed that, okay, learning by doing is the best way. And they started with QC activities, but within a few months, they were already able to do the mapping themselves. Because, well, they got a lot of support from the other team members who were already longer within the team, and they really felt supported. But it was really nice to see how easily they actually got into the team and really learned all the mapping relating tasks. So that was really nice. Well, after the pilot project, we evaluated the project, and we took a look, okay, which approach are we going to take within the second part of the project? And then we actually adjusted it. We thought, because, well, we had a lot of career starters which are really eager to learn. We thought it would be nice if a team member could just be responsible for a complete study rather than just for a few domains, because if they were just responsible for a few domains, they had to do that for each study. And we thought, like, okay, maybe that will become a little bit repetitive and maybe a bit boring. And we thought, okay, we think we have a good team here. We think they are capable of just managing a complete study. So they actually had to annotate the CRF. They had to convert the data to SOTM, create a Define-XML, the SRG, the same for Adam, and they also had to create tables. And you could maybe argue that this is not the most efficient way of handling this conversion, but we think it was the best decision ever, because it really kept the team members motivated, and they were really happy that they had a lot of variety within the work. But of course, they also learned a lot, because, well, it was just a full spectrum of the conversion projects. Well, in every project, it's of course important that you do things efficiently and consistently, but especially in this project, which was, well, it was of course a long project, but we had to deliver quite a lot. So we were really eager, like, okay, we need to do things efficiently and consistently. Within OCS, we already had some tools available that would help us in ensuring that the things were done efficiently and consistently, but we also developed or enhanced some tools. And this was mainly done by based on the team IDs. So some team members had some IDs to develop things, and they were also developed by the team members. So that was really nice. And all those tools actually aim to reduce the repetitive number of tasks, and that team members could focus on the data, which of course is the most important, but also the nicest thing of data conversion. I would now like to discuss some of these tools that we had in place or that we developed during the conduct of this project. The first one is this pre-analysis that you see in the slide. So before we actually started the mapping, we did a pre-analysis of the studies. And we determined similarities between the studies in terms of study design, but also ACRF. So that was more or less like a manual inspection. But we also compared the received source data for the studies. So here you see an overview of this pre-analysis report, and this is just displaying it for adverse events. But you can easily see which variables are available in source data set AE for the different studies. And for instance, you can see that variable AE expect, so expected, unexpected, was only available in 2 studies. But still, it will help you when you want to map those studies. Do you see, okay, how did we handle it in study 3? We should do it the same way in study 4. And this report really helps us also in doing the resource allocation, because of course we want to do the things efficiently. So we assigned the same person to studies that were similar. And yeah, this also helped us in doing the conversion efficiently, because we could make use of mappings that we did in another study already, and we could just make use of it in another study. And that really helped us in making this project efficient. Then our SOTM datasets, when we really started with the mapping, we created the SOTM datasets using the mapping engine that was designed and developed by OCS Life Sciences. And this mapping engine converts actually the source data to output data. And the only input that it needs, besides, of course, the source data, are the mapping specifications. And the mapping specifications actually contain just one. No problem. Oh, yeah, you can go to the next one. That's fine. Yes. So here you actually see this an example of that Excel spreadsheet. So the mapping specification file. And this is the only thing that the mapping engine needs. So the mapping engine itself actually consists of a set of SAS programs that ensures that this mapping specification file is being read and also interpreted correctly. But as a user, you only need to populate this Excel sheet. And if you go through the Excel sheet, you see on the left side the source data sets and source variables. So all source data sets and source variables that are applicable to your study should be part of this Excel sheet. Then you see your target DS and target variables. So, okay, which source variable should be mapped to which target variable. Then there's just a human readable specification. So this doesn't really have a functionality, but just as a user and also as a validator, you want to see, okay, how were these target variables derived? And then in the right column, in the function column, there's actually the pseudocode, how we call it, that the mapping engine needs to perform the actual conversion. So we just have some codes available, some functions available, in which by which the mapping engine knows, okay, this is how I need to convert data. So, for instance, if we take an example and we take a look at AE spits, then you see that the function is just copy, which means that the source variable is directly being copied to AE spits. But you also see that there's a where statement, so only certain records should be selected. So it's just really easy to map the data because, well, it doesn't need that much SAS program. It just needs, well, simple code. And of course, we can also add SAS program, so SAS code over here in this function code, but it's really user-friendly actually to map the data in such a way. Well, at the right bottom, you also see a recoding list that we could apply. So we also had a function recodes. So if we had to recode source values 1, 2, 3, then we recoded them to mild, moderate, and severe, and therefore we had this function recode in place. And well, as I mentioned, within this project, we used a mapping engine to convert the data to SOTM. And the team members really thought it was really easy to learn and to use. It's really a user-friendly tool. And as it is Excel-based, it's really easy to, well, select and to filter certain mappings. And that is really helpful in reusing those mappings in other studies that are really comparable. So that makes, again, the conversion really efficiently, but also consistently, because if you can make use of previous mappings, well, there will be less inconsistencies. Then after the mappings, we actually created a data steward report. And this data steward report gives an overview of all the SOTM datasets and ADAM datasets that we created. And then within each dataset, the variable names, the variable labels, types, and values, so really the attributes. And this was really to check whether the mapping was done consistently, so that whether the same values were assigned, for instance, to LBCAT. Well, as you can see in this example, in LBCAT, 2 values were used, drug test and drug testing. And in study 2, the value drug testing was assigned. Well, as you can imagine, this is an inconsistency, and that's something that we wanted to fix. So this data steward report really gives you insight in which values have been assigned and was it done consistently. But at some point, we also started using this actually as a library because, yeah, it gives you all the information, it gives you all the values that were assigned in previous studies, so you could easily look up, like, okay, which value, for instance, for LBCAT should be assigned if drug tests were done. Then the last tool that I want to mention is the Define-XML tool that we created. Well, when we started this project, so during the pilot project, we used Pinnacle 21 tool to create Define-XML, which of course is a really nice tool to support you in the creation of Define-XML, but it only provides you some metadata on dataset level and variable level, and it still requires you to input a lot of things manually. So here you can see an overview, and well, we, for instance, had to assign the origin ourselves and also the CRF pages. But then during the project, we thought of, maybe we can automate some parts of this Define-XML. And this was actually the idea of 2 team members, and they were really eager to develop such a tool. So, well, we allowed them to develop it, and they came up with a program to both create and to validate the Define-XML. And as you can see in this slide and in this overview, already a lot of items were filled out. So even the annotations on which page they were collected on the CRF was already populated. And that's really helped a lot in reducing the time that we needed for the development and validation of a Define-XML. But again, also really important is that it really kept the team motivated, that they were allowed to think about tools that we could develop or enhance. And well, the things that we didn't have to do anymore were the tedious, repetitive tasks. So they were really happy that we now had a tool in place to support us in that. Yes, and then I would like to hand over to Jasmine. Yes, she's going to talk about team diversity.
Yes, yes. So indeed, the team, it was a relative young team, and initially we were not concerned actually quite excited about having the team in. But because they weren't vastly experienced in clinical development, we thought, let's make the most of what they still know from coming back. So with the team, we had just one data manager and 2 real expert technical SAS programmers. And then the vast majority of the team were, in fact, clinical programmers doing the conversion. But we also made use of their language skills, which you will see in a little bit. And we also made a lot of use from, what was their background, when was it, more the technology driven, or when was it really about the content of the data? Because as you probably realize, when you do legacy data conversion, sometimes it's science and sometimes it's a little bit more of an art in trying to understand what the data meant, especially if it wasn't always well described. So just give you one example of using the team diversity for problem resolution. Right? So the data challenge that we had is that the data did come from multiple CROs, and some of the data was quite old, coming back from 2006 to now. There were a lot of source issues with that, and sometimes there was no metadata described, sometimes it was, and a lot of the documents were not in English. So an example of that is we had a data set like this. It's called CAL. It's a SAS data set, of course. It did not have, so it had all these variables, but there were no labels with the variables and there were no units. We could not find anything back in the SAP. We found a short reference to, and we'll see it in a little bit in the protocol, but also not in the CSR. But still, the data was there. So we realized from the protocol that it probably had to do with calorimetry, because the data set was cal, and we did see in the protocol that there was such a thing as calorimetry. So that's where we started. I said, what if this is a calorimetry data set? What are the typical measurements that we would find there? And so we went digging into literature to see, okay, what are the typical results? And then you see here, you have direct and indirect calorimetry and energy expenditure. And we looked at some graphs and we said, yes, there's glucose, there's oxidated glucose, there's non-oxidated glucose. So we were trying to put, we saw a few things that started to make sense to us. Then, so that was the second part of what we had. Then we still had a few measurements. If you go back to the previous one, so we were now able to find out the carbon dioxide and the oxygen with the glucose and lipids and proteins and nitrogen, but we still had 2 variables that we had no idea what they were. At least we weren't able to find them just yet. So these were the ones that we linked. We did more literature research and we said, yes, there's a few more variables that are very typical of calorimetry. What does this mean? Next step that we did was really very simple. We used our language skills and we said, okay, from the previous page, we saw that there was such a thing as energy expenditure. And what happens in France is in French, and excuse me for the French that are here, usually you switch your words around. So we figured that's probably what happened. The words were switched around. So energy expenditure became dépense énergie. And the NPRQ was QRNP in French. Of course, we didn't just say, okay, great, we got it like that. We did validate to see if all these results made sense. We recalculated them. But you do see that we, so I'm going to go back one more, that we had to use a diversity of skills, both technical and content and language, to be able to fix the legacy data conversion. And then the team diversity really helped us become a success. With that, I'm going to hand over back to Lieke to talk about the final steps in the project. Lieke?
Yes, so, well, the current status is actually that the project has been delivered. It has been delivered on time and also with high quality, and that has been confirmed by an independent reviewer. And well, we plan to celebrate actually in April, but yeah, because of the COVID outbreak, we had to postpone, but we will definitely celebrate soon because it was really a successful project. Yes, and if we then go to our conclusion, I would like to share just some key learnings that we had during the conduct of this project. Well, we've really seen that motivation is the key to success, and therefore it's really important to keep your team motivated and to really involve them in project decisions. And really know, but also more important, accept that there's no one approach to doing it right. Please involve your team and let them come up with some ideas and suggestions. And well, what really helped us was that we really had the availability, we allowed the team members to create tools that reduce the repetitive tasks, and that they could really focus on what is most important, and also the thing that they really liked, which is the data, so that they could really puzzle with the data and ensure that the conversion was done correctly. Well, and having said this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and we are more than happy to answer any questions.